Missouri in these United States, and I have with me my wife Heather, who goes by Mrs. Radlib on the internet in the internet world. And we're going to get right to it. We're going to talk about birth. Some of you may have already seen her birth stats. We'll be getting to that in just a bit after a little bit of an introduction of sort of what we have in mind today. So, actually, first thing to talk about is why are we talking about birth? And we didn't even write down what I think is the main thing, which I mentioned in the marketing for this, which is that there's a lot of fear around birth.
Yes.
And I don't know how much guys would be aware of this, and were you aware of this when you were, a teenager? That birth was supposed to be scary and stuff? Or was it as you became pregnant and people started saying weird stuff to you?
Well, I was around people that didn't really talk about birth much. And I think what made me aware of birth just, as a thing was that there was a lady who lived up the street from us who had, I think, 6 children, and she had babies at home. And she nursed her babies. And I just remember visiting her with my mother. And I just was so captured by this idea of, I don't know, it just seemed like she really claimed and owned birth as something that was very important to her. And that the whole birthing process was important to her. And she made choices that honored that process and honored her body. And I would not have been able to articulate that as a teenager. What I felt was sort of a visceral reaction to it. I felt attracted to her approach to birth, I guess is what you might say.
Okay. Sorry, distracted by the fact that we're not on the screen yet. Okay.
Yeah. We've been having technical difficulties this morning, so please forgive us.
This is going to work. Okay. I have no idea what's going on.
Yeah.
Okay. Here, give me a sec. We're going to actually listen to ourselves, which is annoying. But
yeah.
I want to see if this is working. Stats. We'll be getting to that in just a bit after a little bit of an introduction of sort of what we have in mind today. Okay. Well, the video is jumping around, and I don't know why, but you can hear us. So that's the important thing. So we'll just keep talking.
Hope it writes itself.
And we'll have a still image up shortly anyway.
Okay.
And that won't jump around. So
yeah. So the fear around birth, I think, is reason enough to talk about it, but there are other reasons to talk about birth.
Well, wait, did you cover the fear around birth part, which is that when you were first pregnant, women were coming up to you and like injecting fear?
Yeah, it was kind of shocking, actually. Yeah. The way that everyone was, oh, just take the drugs, when I, go to give birth. But I think it was more that because I was so uneducated about what actually happens with my body when giving birth, it was sort of this ominous unknown, and so there's
a lack of knowledge.
Right. And so any feedback that I got, which was mostly negative, ended up really coloring my emotional preparations for giving birth. And, it was kind of negative.
Yeah. So I was surprised too, you would share some of these things with me. I don't know how much I heard of them myself, but separately you'd be getting this feedback. And basically it seemed like you got a lot of feedback I would call not encouraging.
Right.
They weren't, helping you understand and reducing fear or whatever.
Right.
They were making things worse, basically. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah. And, surprisingly, this kind of making things worse was also coming from the people who were supposed to be making it better, namely the OB, the, gynecologists, the people who were supposed to be my support in giving birth.
Experienced older moms.
Right. Exactly. So, there's a lot of miseducation related to it.
That was a shocker.
Yeah.
To get such discouraging feedback.
Absolutely.
Okay. So, couple of the things, and then we'll get a still image up so we stop jumping around with this video buffering that's happening. In fact, I wanted to see slideshow Carson's. Yeah. Just checking with our chat if this is working. As long as you can hear us, I'm not too worried about the jumpy video, and I have no idea why it's happening. I've checked and I can't figure it out. Okay. Oh, good. Now suddenly it stopped. Okay.
Hopefully
anyway,
you can
so,
see us in real time now.
so yeah, that was one of the reasons I personally felt motivated for us to cover this on the Mrs. Radlib series, is that I saw the kind of fear that people were putting into my wife when she was first pregnant. It's like, this is bizarre.
Yeah.
But then we got into actually giving birth, and we learned some things that were surprising. So talk about what you could call the political angle, so to speak, or about this.
Well, I think it's a political issue primarily because there's coercion. There is a lot of coercion, a lot of not respecting a woman's body, and that's problematic.
Right.
People, in order to give birth, you need to have a sense of safety. You need to feel supported. And there was it was just really lacking, is what I was finding, that there was a real lack of that, And so I think in a way, because of the coercion, birth has become a libertarian issue, a political issue, something that women need to advocate for themselves and for each other.
So can you give, we might get into more of this later, but can you give like one story, doesn't have to be from you, but one story to illustrate? Because I think for a lot of people, especially men, they'd be like, coercion around birth, what in the world are you talking about? So could you give just like one concrete tale so that people get an idea of what you mean by coercion?
Oh my gosh. It's hard to pick one. One that comes to mind, I guess I should say before we really get into the nitty-gritty of this, that we're going to be talking about women's bodies. We're going to be talking about parts of their bodies and naming those parts. And perhaps I'm giving my own sense of shyness away just by the way I'm talking about it right now. But so in order for me to give a concrete example, I just need to be very just straightforward that obviously when you're giving birth, you're dealing with your sexual parts, you're dealing with your private parts. And when in the hospital, it's like once you walk through those doors, those parts don't belong to you anymore. Right. And so I've had doctors touch me in ways that would be considered assault. But because I was giving birth, it was just part of the job. It was just part of something that I was supposed to be putting up with. So I don't know if that's concrete enough for you.
That's part of it. I guess the other angle I would say is that there's pressure to do things the medical way. We'll talk about the two approaches to birth in a bit. There's pressure to do things in the sort of the mainstream way that verges on coercion, and in some cases that we've heard about, outright goes into coercion.
Oh, yeah.
Where women do not want certain things done to them, and they basically just do it to them anyway without their consent.
That's right.
Right. I keep thinking of the wonderful birth sketch. If I wasn't going to get copyright struck, I would have played it in Meaning of Life, Monty Python's Meaning of Life, where the doctors say to the mother, "You're not qualified."
Right.
We are the experts. Shut up.
And the machines that go ding. Right.
And so, okay. So I think that's. Oh, one more thing to say. You might have seen our last Mrs. Radlib stream we did was after we went to a conference recently, which was primarily young men, a few women, but primarily young men. And one of the things that the young men were approaching my wife, but in an okay way. They were really pouring their heart out to her, I think, about a number of things. And one of them is that, these are guys who want to have families. They're more traditional, conservative, whatever you want to call it. They'd like to have a wife. They'd like to have children. And one little problem with that is the women often don't want to have children. Now, we've talked about some of those angles on why women wouldn't want to have children are well understood in sort of traditionalist conservative circles. Pressure to be career oriented, corporate career oriented, and things like that, right?
Right.
But this brings an angle on it that you may not have thought of before, which is that they might not feel safe about having children. Now, maybe they don't know the horror stories that we know about, but they might just have picked up a general sense of fear around it. I think that's very easily, from what I've seen, very easy for a young woman to just have a sense of fear about birth, a sense of dread, as opposed to women really encouraging a young woman and saying, this is so exciting, and, having a positive attitude towards it. There's a lot of negativity and fear around it. And then, who knows, maybe some of those young women heard some of these horror stories anyway, of being coerced and so forth.
Right.
So that's an angle that probably I've never heard anyone talk about outside of me and my wife and certain midwives we read and stuff like that, on why women might not be so excited about having children. So it's another thing for those of us who are pro-natalist, to use the technical term,
I've never heard that.
pro having babies. This is another angle to address.
Yes.
Is the act of birth itself.
Right.
How to approach it. We're going to address that on the stream today. But as you'll see by the end, there's practical things that can be done, institutions that can be supported, and a different model, a different approach that can be practically supported by telling people about it, by learning that, there are these other options besides the mainstream options. So anyway, all of that I think is more than enough to talk about, give us reason to talk about birth. Let's now go to what everybody's waiting for. Oh, that's not what I want to do. Okay, let me get my notes straight here, sorry. And we are going to go to Heather's birth stats. Okay, so I made these.
He came up with this idea after the twins were born, and it just...
Here, can you slide out of the way just a sec so that I
Yeah.
can see the...
Yeah.
Oh, it's blocked by the chair. Anyway,
sorry.
it says lifetime stats.
Lifetime
Okay.
stats. Okay.
Yeah, so after Heather had twins, which were our 7th and 8th
Right.
children born,
Right.
I thought it'd be fun to sort of summarize everything. I said, after this exciting season in Heather's motherhood, it's a good time to step back and look at Heather's career motherhood stats. Now, we've updated some of these, thanks to our graphic designer who made this wonderful graphic in the thumbnail, as usual. Thanks, Andrew. We've updated some of these even up to this morning because we realized that I made these right after the twins were born. And we've got some stats here that talk about nursing and stuff. So those, Heather continued to nurse after the twins were born. So we had to change some numbers. And we're still not sure. Some numbers could be even larger. But anyway, let's go through some of these. So 7 births, I guess you could say. I mean, I don't know how you want to think about it. Where one of those was a birth that resulted in 2 babies, right? Or 7 days.
7 deliveries, I guess
7
is what I would
deliveries.
say.
Maybe that's the better term.
I don't know. But anyway,
Right. So
8 children.
there were 7 days on which Heather gave birth, and out of that came 8 babies, right? Because of twins.
Right.
Let's see, what's next? So half of the babies were born at home. 4 out of 7 of the deliveries were home births.
Right.
And we'll talk more about those home births. Actually, there were we did some different things for those home births. Though I was saying that you'd done all the births, and then someone in my comments on Telegram said that their 3rd birth was an unattended birth. And I was like, okay, you got us beat there. We didn't do that.
Yes.
We'll talk about that option. That's the ultimate. We're talking about a spectrum of birth options.
Right.
They did the extreme non-mainstream version to do
Yes,
an
and I did
unattended birth.
research that and chose against it, but
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
So let's see.
Wait a second. I want to do... Sorry, I wish I could get this like that. Okay. Sorry, getting it so I can see us and our chat on YouTube all at
Okay.
the same time. Okay.
So
Now, other stats.
3 hospital births, 4 home births, 1 transfer. With our 6th, we started at home, realized he was malpositioned. Yeah.
Right. So 5 of the deliveries started at home. One of them was a transfer.
Yeah.
That's really important. And we'll
Yeah.
come back around to the transfer because people have a real black and white view that you either do things the mainstream way, the medical way, the medical model, or you are complete hippie granola way, right? But actually, there's a whole spectrum, and we would not advise that you just unthinkingly go to one end or the other. You need to think about risk factors, where you are physically, how close you are to certain resources. All of these things can factor into where you land on how you give birth.
Absolutely.
Okay, so more stats. Inductions. I'm kind of working off this a little.
Okay, yeah.
So induction. So this is very common in hospitals, is that they get in there and they say, you're not progressing fast enough. And then they induce you. I have not researched on this. I don't know if you've done some of this in your reading, but it seems to me that inductions are one of those things that is probably vastly overused. That would be my guess.
Yeah, I did look up some stats on ACOG, which is the obstetric and gynecology page, and I think we have the stats up here somewhere, but I want to say it was like 25%, but that seems low that were induced. It might be more than that, but
there's a lot of induction. Induction is where they put a chemical. I don't know the
they put
technical
Pitocin,
details,
which is
Pitocin.
Yeah. So the natural hormone in our body is oxytocin, and so they give you a synthetic form of that called Pitocin,
right,
or PIT as they refer to it, in jargon.
It tends to be harsher than the natural process.
Yeah, it's supposed to kickstart your labor, and then they're supposed to back off on the Pitocin and let your body take over. But that is not often what happens.
Right. So, and it can be kind of harsh to the birth experience.
Absolutely. It makes the contractions stronger, harder on baby.
We did not cover this in our stats, but a very good question from the chat from David Gonzalez, I don't know how to say that. Opinion on epidurals. Okay, so Heather did have an epidural how many times?
3 times.
3 times.
Basically my hospital births.
All the hospital births had epidurals.
Yes.
An epidural is a spinal tap or something. That makes it sound dramatic. It is dramatic.
Yeah, no.
They put something in the spine and they deaden basically the bottom half of the body.
They block any feeling.
We'll come back to that because I think we need to talk about the 2 models of birth, and then we need, once we've done that, we'll revisit this whole issue of epidurals and I think give you a different perspective than you might have on that. Okay, so let's look at some other stats. AYB, what does that mean? This is the most important stat. People think it's the number of babies. And sure, I'm thrilled that we have 8 children, right? I mean, I just can't believe it. We didn't start early. We weren't 19 when we started having babies. We were older. I was in my 30s. So just amazing that we were able to have 8 children. Having said that, when people are like, oh, that must be so hard that you had 8 babies. No. You're talking about the wrong thing. Well, read the Poe comments.
Yeah.
We're going to be very blunt. Anyway, okay. Thank you, Poe, for going there.
Yeah.
Okay, so it is not the number of children that tells you how challenging raising children is. It is this stat right here. Average years between birth. I tried to make it into a baseball stat. AYB. Heather did a 1.375 average years between births.
Right.
That means every 1.3 years on average.
Yeah.
Sometimes closer than that.
Yes.
Shorter than that.
Yeah.
Every 1.3 years, there was another baby coming out.
Right.
Well, what does that mean in practical terms? This is where it gets challenging, right? Is that Heather had just baby, so that our first 3, who were the quickest,
in succession.
Closest together. 2 years and 8 months.
Yeah, so our oldest was 2 years and 8 months old, so 2.5. I had a 1-year-old, and then I had a newborn. So that was,
Right. So what does
really
that
intense.
mean? It means Heather is caring for a newborn baby, and she basically has 2 other babies.
Yeah.
And they're not newborns.
I didn't realize how much it was like having twins until I had twins. Then I was like, oh, yeah, that was like having twins.
The second and third in particular, 14 months apart.
Yeah.
Not only was it like having twins as a parental experience, but then we have noticed that they interact like they're twins.
Yeah.
In certain ways.
Yeah, they do.
They're
quite close.
They're a boy and a girl, the ones who are closest together until the twins. But they have a sort of a twins dynamic.
Yeah.
Which we didn't recognize until we had actual twins, and then we could see it.
Right.
Okay, well, some other things. 4 completely natural births. So all those home births were completely natural. What do we mean by a natural birth? We mean no Pitocin, no epidural. So there was no pain relief is the term that would be typically used for it. But as we'll see later, I don't think that's a great term to think about. I think it's better to talk about suppressing what the woman is experiencing during the birth.
And
Anyway,
basically
we'll come back.
no interventions, no medical
but
interventions.
four births with no medical interventions.
Right.
Heather there was someone there was a midwife there, but Heather just basically did it. You know, there was no one like helping her do it in particular, you know. Okay, then 6 singleton births. We didn't even know the term singleton until we had twins. A singleton is when you have one child.
I knew that term.
You knew that term.
Of course.
Okay. 1 was a cesarean. That was a particularly dramatic one. Or I'm sorry, what happened afterwards dramatic. Cesarean. Let's cover some more stats. 1 twins birth, of course. The last delivery was twins, our girls. If we haven't mentioned yet, we had 2 daughters, 4 sons in a row, and then identical twin girls.
Right.
So 2, 4, 2, nice and symmetrical. So that's pleasing to me as a geek, you know. Okay. 14 years of breastfeeding. We're not going to talk so much about nursing in this stream because birth is a huge topic and we'll be busy with that.
Yeah.
But Heather was so inspired by this and working with the La Leche League that supports breastfeeding that we have talked about maybe doing a stream on nursing sometime. Heather's thought about helping as a lactation consultant, basically someone who helps moms get started on nursing.
Or just troubleshoot, because I mean there are issues that can come up.
Right.
And
They start
you need
nursing
help and
fine. They
support.
start nursing fine, and then they run into some trouble.
Well, I
of
think
some
people
sort.
have a
They
misconception
need
that
advice.
that it's just going to come naturally. Baby's going to latch on, and then you're going to nurse. But it's a little more complicated than that.
It helps to have an experienced mom
Yeah,
advise you.
absolutely. It helped me.
So we already mentioned 3 hospital births, and then a little more on nursing. Years of tandem nursing. What is tandem nursing? Tandem nursing is when you're nursing more than one baby at the same time.
That's right.
Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you're literally nursing them one on one breast, one on the other, though Heather did that.
Yes.
But it means that, you're nursing one and then you're nursing another later or whatever. Typically even on the same day, right? Or it would be on the same day. So
Well, with the
Heather,
twins,
Heather did 9+ years. We actually would have to think more about it to figure out how much of it.
Which
At least
basically-
9 years of more than 2. Obviously, part of that is because she had twins, so she
Right.
was nursing them. But there were other times where
Right.
they were so close together that the one that had already been born a year ago was still being nursed when the newborn came along.
Right. So typically, after our first 3 were born, our other children are 2 years apart, almost exactly. So I would be nursing through the pregnancy, and then the new baby would come, and then I would just keep nursing. And so the older toddler would nurse for a little while longer, and then they would wean usually fairly soon after, and then the new baby would just be the one nursing, and then I would get pregnant again. And then
Right.
I would,
Right, and of course, we had to highlight bottom stat on the graphic, and then we'll cover a few more that might not be in the stats page here. Children tandem nursed simultaneously. 3, obviously, you can imagine what that was, which is that the twins were born, and our son, who'd been born before them, was still nursing.
right.
And so Heather continued to nurse him
Yeah.
while
Just for a
nursing
little while.
while nursing twins.
Right.
But for a
Just
brief time, she was
briefly.
nursing 3 babies.
This is making me seem like a total nut.
I don't think so. I think
Okay.
it's amazing. I love this stuff. Okay,
Okay.
so let's see if anything else we didn't put on the card.
I think that's probably it.
We mostly got it, right? No, there's more. Okay, so 6 were vaginal births, right? So 7 deliveries. One of them was C-section. The other were vaginal.
That's right.
And one, there's different kinds of vaginal births.
Yes.
One is what some people, this is a dreaded thing. In the hospital, they freak out over this. One was a VBAC.
Right.
That is a vaginal birth after cesarean.
Right.
And the general attitude is once you've had a cesarean, any births you have after that are cesareans. And that's a very typical pattern.
That has
women
been
just have cesarean, cesarean,
Right.
cesarean. In the past.
Yes.
It's starting to shift.
It's starting to shift, but to have a vaginal birth with twins after having had a cesarean, and one of those twins was a footling breech, this was kind of an intense and unusual situation. And I really advocated for myself to get that vaginal birth, because there was pressure with the twins pregnancy to just go ahead and sign up for a cesarean and just, get it done.
Right.
And I just, well,
you found, a couple things. You advocated strongly for what you wanted, which
Right.
was to try a VBAC.
right.
And we found a wonderful doctor who was able to back us up
Absolutely.
and get us through this.
Yeah. So the twins were a high risk pregnancy, and we'll talk a little bit more about why they were high risk. But, I basically just said, look, I don't want to have a surgery unless I absolutely have to. And if you are not trained to deliver these twins, or you're not comfortable with that, then I need to find somebody who is. And so we did find someone who was, and he was able to train 2 other OBs during the delivery. And that delivery
Right.
happened in the operating room, just in case.
Yeah.
You know.
And this was epic. Here's the evidence it's epic. Take a look at Poe's question. I want to address that. One of the reasons this was epic is that, or that I know it was epic, is that we were back in the hospital after the twins were born for something else, and mentioned at that same hospital, but not in labor and delivery, and mentioned to the nurse, oh yeah, my wife just delivered these babies VBAC, and one of them was a footling breech, and the nurse said, oh, I've heard about your birth. We were like, oh, we're famous.
Right. Well, it's unusual because I did go to a twins club when I first got pregnant with the twins, and everyone I met was just signing up for their cesarean. I think there was one other mom that kind of took me aside and said, I had mine vaginally, and I'll be your buddy because everyone else, and I'm not being down on anyone for making that decision. You make the decision that's best for you and best for your babies, but that's just not what I wanted. And there wasn't a lot of examples of that out there.
Right.
But I think that if I hadn't been a seasoned mother, I would have been much more easily coerced into a surgery.
Right.
For that
Pressured into it.
Absolutely.
Okay. So Poe has a great question that fits right
Yeah.
in, because we're
Shall I
talking
read it out loud?
about that twins birth. Go ahead.
Yeah. After giving birth to one twin, how did you find the strength to birth the next one, or were the twins a C-section? So obviously we answered the latter question, that the twins were not a C-section, they were vaginal. I think because I really knew my body, and I had been, as we'll go into a little bit with some of these other births, I had been tried, so to speak, and I kind of knew what I was made of. I knew what I could do. And I also had a doctor that really listened to me. And so, I basically told him exactly what was going to happen with my body, and that's exactly what happened. And so I had good support. There were a couple negative things that happened, which I'll go into later. But I had really good support. And so there really wasn't an issue of needing strength to get it done. It was actually a pretty easy birth.
And I remember, they didn't cheer in the operating room, but it felt like, I think our main doctor, right, blessed us. Mm-hmm. He was like, wow, amazing, Heather, and he really meant it. Because he's like,
I don't remember this. Did he say that to me?
Something like that, yeah. Because at certain points, because of dealing with the footling breech and meaning which our last baby came out feet first.
Yeah.
So they had to reach in and grab a foot and then grab another foot and sort of birth a part of the baby at a time. And so he would literally be like, okay, don't push. Okay, now push. It was like, and Heather was just really, in the zone. It was, he was
like the birth test. He was the catcher,
yeah,
and I was the pitcher, and we're cooperating.
And I would say that, it's not totally inappropriate to say that it was like a great athletic moment. That's how he responded. He was like, hey, you did it.
I never thought I was good at sports, but I just needed to find my sport. Right?
Exactly. Giving babies. Okay. So I think that's all we'll do on the birth stats. We'll be obviously covering more on that, but let's get into some history, and then we're going to talk about the 2 models of birth. I'm going to go back to us being on the screen here.
So before we go any further, I do want to, full disclosure, neither Stephen nor I are doctors. Neither one of us has any medical training. I'm not a nurse. I'm not a doula. I'm not any kind of a birth support. I've just given birth to 8 children, and I have done a lot of reading about birth. And so it's just what I've learned through my experiences and the reading that we're going to convey to you. So please don't mistake anything we say here as medical advice. So I just want to put that out there
Yeah.
before we go any further.
Yeah, we're sharing our experiences and some of
Right.
what we've learned that have given us a different perspective on the whole thing.
Exactly. So
My hope with this is not that you go and do something foolish, but that you're better informed so that when you go into your own birth, you understand more options than you might have before. And you're able to pick some options that are best for you and your baby,
Right.
and safest and most healthy.
and I think for me, I think if I had known what I know now, and had someone been able to sit down with me and explain all this to me, I think I would have gone into our first birth so much more relaxed, so much better prepared,
Yeah.
you know. And so anyway, that's kind of the
Okay.
reason why we want to do this.
We left out of our notes we didn't put in our notes explicitly the first thing you need to know about birth, which is that for all of human history until a couple hundred years ago,
Yeah.
birth was something that was in the sphere of women, and women helped other women. For those who know the Bible, you might know the story of Exodus, and that the Pharaoh basically wants to genocide the Hebrews by them not having baby boys or killing their baby boys. And so he tells the Egyptian midwives, right? They're the Egyptian women are helping the Hebrew women have babies. He tells the Egyptian midwives to kill any baby Hebrew boy that is born. And then the midwives won't do it. And they lie and they say, they're just so vigorous, they just shoot those babies out. By the time we get there, it's already a done deal and it's too late, you know. And it says that God blesses those midwives, right? Well, this is thousands of years ago, right? And this was the case not just in ancient Egypt, but up to just several hundred years ago. So now, having given that's normal, that's the historical norm. That's not where we are now.
Right.
How'd we get there?
Right. So I found a really good timeline of kind of the historical perspectives and you know, about how it went over these last 200
Is this a
years.
link I should share?
There is a very good link.
Okay.
Yeah, I think
I'll share that.
Did I,
Go ahead.
Yeah. So basically, starting in about the 1700s, you know, physicians first began to portray the idea that birth is pathological, that it is a condition that required medical intervention rather than just a natural normal function of the body.
Right.
So, and then
And this might be confusing to people because people will immediately think, just because the way we've sort of been brainwashed on this topic, they'll immediately think, yeah, but sometimes you really do need a C-section. Okay, well, yeah, that's true, but sometimes you're eating and you start choking, right? That doesn't mean that eating should be classified in our mind as primarily a medical event.
Right.
Right? It is a normal thing that we do with our bodies that sometimes there can be issues, right?
Absolutely.
And that's the same thing with birth. With the right support and the right knowledge, 95+% of the time, or higher, your birth should just be a thing that you can do without any of all this modern apparatus.
Right. But I think just the introduction of this idea that birth is it's a pathological condition, that it is something that isn't normal, that the process that a woman's body goes through to bring forth a child is inherently pathological, that there's something wrong, that the discomfort that we feel means that there's something wrong. And I think I think that as Americans, you know, that this idea that any amount of physical discomfort, any amount of suffering means that there is something wrong, and that
We've got to get rid of it. Yeah.
Right. Medical intervention is required.
Right.
And so, I mean, there's a lot of history that could be covered here, but essentially this led to a campaign against the granny midwives, against midwives that were the primary support for women in giving birth. And things began to shift to where the doctors, which were mostly male, were then taking over the birth, you know, and delivering of babies.
Right.
So by the time that the 1920s came along, birth began to move out of the home and into the hospital. So it was still happening at home, but it was being attended by physicians, okay, who were men. And then it began to move out of the home and into the hospital.
Right.
It's actually not that long ago.
So yeah, bear in mind, in the vast sweep of history, it's only been 100 years that people think that the normal thing is to go to the hospital to have a baby.
Right.
It's just 100 years.
Right.
Right.
So,
And like so many, what is it Rothbard said, repeal the 20th century. Like
Right.
so many things people in our circles recognize, I think this is just yet another mistake that we've made in modern times that we need to unwind.
right. Yeah. So by the time the 1950s were around, 95% of women were giving birth in a hospital, and it was treated like a high risk experience. All birth was being treated like, oh gosh, we got to freak out here. This is pathological. We need interventions. So, I mean, that's a huge shift in a rather short time.
That's basically a generation from 20s to 50s. That's
Right.
in one generation. We went from women generally giving birth at home to women almost entirely giving birth in the hospital.
And let me be clear.
Boom.
Not only were they giving birth in the hospital, they were strapped down. They were not allowed to move. They were drugged. They were not allowed to get up and walk around at least 10 days after having given birth, which, by the way, is really harmful. Okay. It can lead to blood clotting and other issues, So, there was just this complete swing in the other direction.
Roderick makes a really good point here. Roderick embarks in the chat. He says, this is still the norm in the Netherlands.
Yes.
Home birth with non-MD
Yes.
female midwives.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
there are parts of Europe, like the Netherlands, there's others, I think, because we've looked at this, where they have just continued to do home births.
They have, and their birth statistics are much better than ours.
And they have better results.
They do.
Yeah.
They do.
So we're talking about the U.S. in terms of our history. We're sort of U.S. Well, probably U.K. and U.S. I think.
I'm focusing primarily on the United States.
Okay.
So I can't speak to. I mean.
Even the U.K.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Yeah, I don't want to get confused about that.
All right. So 20s to 50s.
Right.
At least in the U.S.
Right.
Goes from the home to the hospital.
Yeah.
And then that's where it is when I'm born, for example, in '69. And then we start to get a little trend backwards. So talk about that.
We did. So, as many of you probably know, the 60s and 70s were a time of upheaval of cultural norms of various sorts, including birth and breastfeeding, and really the way that families were functioning in terms of bringing new people into the world. And so there began to be a resurgence of interest in things that were more natural. And I have a little anecdote related to you about that, which is that Stephen's mother told me that in the hospital, she was discouraged from breastfeeding.
Yeah.
Stephen. And the doctor, was like, you need to give him this formula and this is what you need to do. And she just disobeyed. She thought, well, this is the way my body's made and my body's making this milk and this must be good for him. And so she did it anyway. And
she said, and specifically, I remember her telling me this, that she would not tell her doctor she was nursing.
Exactly.
Because formula was like the big trend.
Exactly. But in the 70s, there started to be this resurgence of interest in doing things naturally and working with our bodies. And so along came a young lady who was a hippie, and her and her husband, along with a caravan of other people, actually started a commune called The Farm, and they live in Tennessee on about 300 acres. And her name was Ina Mae Gaskin, and she essentially became the mother of modern midwifery in the United States. And she wrote this amazing book called Spiritual Midwifery.
Sure.
Well, this is not Spiritual Midwifery,
okay.
But this is another one of her books, which is Ina Mae's Guide to Childbirth. There we go. Get it up for you guys.
Yeah.
And in it, she begins to talk about the midwifery approach to giving birth versus the medical model approach to giving birth. And so she talks about technomedical versus midwifery model. And she goes into great detail about this. And a lot of this was through her personal experience delivering babies as they were caravanning to what was going to become their new home on this commune. They were stopping and delivering babies like on the bus and stuff, which is kind of intense, she did some traveling and learned from mountain midwives in South America at one point.
Where there was an unbroken tradition of midwifery.
Right,
because
exactly.
the tradition had been broken in the United States to a
Right.
great degree.
So she provides in her books an extensive and rich history of the two models, but I'm just going to kind of touch on them a little bit here. So if Stephen can give me my access to my notes of my.
Okay, so you don't want to start with that?
Well, yeah, I can start with that a little bit, but I would like to have my notes available so that I can be looking at that as well. So first I want to talk about the technomedical model, not those notes, the article notes.
These notes?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Where do you want to
down a little bit. No, sorry, up. Sorry, guys. No, I need to be higher in the article. There we go. Okay. Yeah. Okay, now I'll see that. Okay, sorry. Okay, so the technomedical model primarily focuses on what is wrong, basically. The approach to labor is on three specific things, namely the baby, the pelvis and the vagina, and then the strength of the contractions, okay? And if one of these things is not specifically aligned, then it is said that something has gone wrong.
Aligned to what their sort of expectations
Their
are.
expectation, yeah. Exactly. So the baby, let's see, the technomedical model, I'm just going to read from my article because it states it really, really well.
I will share this article that we're drawing from.
Thank you, Stephen. So the technomedical model looks at the woman from the perspective of the three P's, in Gaskin's opinion: the passenger, the baby; the passage, the pelvis and the vagina; and the powers, meaning the strength of the uterine contractions. And according to the three P's, if a woman's body doesn't deliver the baby in the time prescribed, then either her body grew too big a baby, her vagina is too small, or her pelvis is too narrow, or her uterus is just too weak. Thus, interventions are needed. So the main problem with this way of thinking is that it does not allow for individual differences in the way each woman's body progresses through labor. Okay. While we obviously each have the same basic design, our body's ways of working within that design differ from woman to woman. So,
I want to draw an analogy.
Yeah.
Ryan Turnipseed, co-host on my show, says people rarely talk about the progressives taking over the medical industry. So quick rabbit hole. What does it mean when the progressives take something over? They tend to do the, Procrustes bad, right? They tend to want to stretch everybody to fit, stretch or shrink everybody to fit into a certain model. And it's this emphasis on rule by experts. We know best, and you need to sort of fit into our thing. What's another example to draw sort of a parallel to what we're talking about here? It'd be the government schools, right? Or in the government schools, I'm sorry, we're going to have to keep your child behind. They're just not keeping up on math. Right. And everybody's got to be, at age 8, you've got to be doing this with math and reading and so on and so forth. If you're not, sorry, buddy. Right. There's something kind of, I remember the shame if someone got held back a grade, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well,
and in our homeschooling, of course, we find that they just, at a certain point, and you just kind of can't predict, they suddenly start reading and they suddenly jump forward in their math.
Right.
And it's just organic and very individual, and trying to fit them into some kind of here's the train schedule, and you didn't get on the train, so you missed the train.
Yes.
That's terrible. Well, that's exactly what we're talking about with birth.
Yeah.
You get into the hospital, and I always picture it as somebody hits a stopwatch, and now they're timing you.
Yeah.
And you better do things when they expect you to do things, or they're going to start doing things to you to make you to make you fit into the preconceived schedule they have. Preconceived picture of how the birth should look. Right.
So one of the examples with regard to the baby, this is something that I heard a lot of moms talk about, which is that, doctors like to do ultrasounds, and sometimes it can be very helpful and needed. I mean, with the twins, it was a high-risk pregnancy. It was really important that we have ultrasounds to make sure that they were progressing, because they developed a condition called twin-to-twin transfusion syndrome because of the special kind of pregnancy that they were. So those ultrasounds were life-saving for them and helped us to intervene at the appropriate time, with them. But, most of the time you don't need that much intervention. You don't really need. So I cannot begin to tell you how many times I heard women talk about this, which is that their doctor did an ultrasound later in the pregnancy and told them that their baby was going to be too big to deliver vaginally and that they had better be induced. Okay.
Right. Schedule an induction.
Yeah, the baby's just getting too big, and therefore your vagina, your pelvis is going to be too small to be able to birth this baby. And I cannot remember even one time where the doctor was correct. And I've been around a lot of pregnant women, a lot of women giving birth, and I cannot remember one time where the baby was actually too big. Where, every single time the baby was a pound or more less than what the ultrasound was supposedly saying that the baby was.
Yeah.
And so that immediately set the woman up for interventions.
The funny one was with our C-section. They, is a transfer. So we run to the hospital, and then they do, admittedly, it was not a normal relaxed ultrasound. It was a quick ultrasound. But still, just to give you an idea of how imprecise these things can be, they did an ultrasound, and we didn't want to know this. We always would wait to know the sex of the baby. So they didn't tell us, but they told your sister, I think, who was with
They
us.
said it out loud.
Oh, they
I think
did.
I remember
Oh, okay.
hearing
You do.
it.
Okay.
I mean, I was
And they
in
said
quite a bit of
they
discomfort.
said it looks like a 7-pound girl. It was a 10-pound 1-ounce boy. So they were a little bit off.
I mean, as the baby gets bigger, it's just harder to see exactly,
Right.
what's going on in
So,
there. So
did we cover some of the things that's useful?
right, exactly. So that's baby. Passage is not just whether or not your pelvis is too narrow, but dilation is taking too long. That's the other thing. That's the powers.
That's a big
the
one.
power of the contractions. Your contractions are too weak. It's taking too long. And if I recall correctly, they give you about 12 hours in the hospital from to actually give birth.
Right.
And labor can go on longer. than
Labor
that.
can go on for days.
It can go on for days.
And that's okay.
Right.
Doesn't mean anything's
And
wrong.
the sad thing, and not always, I mean, I've known women who've had interventions in the hospital and they have healthy babies and whatnot. But often these interventions lead to distress in the baby, and then that leads to a surgical birth. And then women are set up for having to fight for a VBAC after they've had a cesarean. And again, I'm on, we have a support group here called the Cesarean Awareness Network, of which a friend of mine was one of the leaders there. And so many women regularly are negotiating with their doctors to have a vaginal birth. I mean, it's like they have to get permission to be able to give birth vaginally after having a cesarean. So once you've had a cesarean, then you have an obstacle in your way to be able to just give birth in the natural, normal way. So the technomedical model really, if you're not fitting into, either the baby's like the certain size and you're dilating, during a certain amount of time, then you're going to have interventions, and that's going to lead to more interventions.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about this one because this particularly bothers me.
Okay.
So in the hospital, because they're coming from this perspective on birth, what we're calling the technomedical model, as Anna Gaskin lays it out, they are not thinking about how to support natural birth, right? So in the midwifery model, the goal is help this woman give birth to her baby. In the hospital model, it's help us doctors and nurses know what's going on, be able to do interventions we want to do,
Right.
stuff like that.
Right.
So things are done for their convenience, but that do not help a natural birth proceed.
Right.
Here's some examples. The mom laid on the back. You've all seen it in the TV if you haven't been at a hospital birth, right? She's laid on her back. That is a terrible position for giving birth. I can tell you that we did 4 births at home, and none of them was Heather pushing that baby out on her back.
No.
That would have been, if I had said, put her on her back like in the hospital, it would have been a little joke, everyone would have laughed. So that's a terrible position. It doesn't facilitate good pushing and so forth. Gravity is against you instead of working with you,
Right.
for example, right?
Right.
A better, an alternative is sort of a squatting position where gravity is pushing down as you're pushing down.
Right.
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 Another one is that they starve the mother. Sorry, you can't eat anything. You can't drink
You can
anything.
only have ice chips.
Yeah, you can have ice chips. Yeah, they're big on the ice chips. Why do they do that? It's because they're always preparing as if you're going to be operated on.
Right.
And when you operate on someone, it's better if they don't have food in their tummy.
Which is true.
Which is true. But this puts the mom in distress because she's hungry, right?
Well,
so when we were at
It's a lot of
home,
work to give birth.
right? Yeah. So when we were at home, Heather drank wine sometimes.
No.
Not a bunch.
One time.
One time.
And
okay.
only
A little
because
bit. Yeah.
only because I was having anyway.
Yeah.
I was having a lot of anxiety and she wanted me
Right. Yeah, she had a little bit of wine one time when we were at home. She would eat some food. She would do, in other words, we were working for the comfort of the mother. And yeah, we're going to get to how important that is in just a moment. Okay, so I think we've hit a lot of these points. Oh yeah, this one. This surprised me. Most of the time interventions happens before doing any checks.
Well, as soon as you get to the hospital,
You just go in and they just start doing stuff.
well, as soon as you get to the hospital, they're like, okay, we need to get you set up with an IV, and so you're basically immediately set up to be able to be given drugs and
Getting
whatnot.
plugged in.
Yeah, and you have to be, have the monitor strapped on, and so you're basically, I mean, as soon as the monitor is strapped onto you, you're in the bed. That's an intervention, okay? Because the best way to give birth is not sitting still necessarily. You need to have movement. You need to be able to work with what the body wants to do, and sitting on a bed with a strap over your belly to monitor contractions, because the nurses don't know that you're having a contraction otherwise. They do.
Yeah.
Well, let's go ahead and talk about the midwifery model, because
Okay,
that's
well,
going
wait,
to explain.
Let's finish up. We're
Okay.
almost there. We're almost
All
there.
right.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah. So I think Heather's emphasized this well. The medical model
It's hard to say, isn't it?
doesn't allow for differences between different mothers, different types of birth.
Right.
It doesn't allow for diversity. It sort of pushes everybody into one schedule, one way it should look. And so labor and delivery at the hospital knows how to intervene.
Yes.
They know how to put an epidural in. They know how to get you going on a C-section, etc. That is their focus. That is what they're good at. When you need that, praise God, they're there.
Yes.
Because they are legitimate. We're gonna show you some stats and stuff like that to demonstrate that C-sections are way overused. Having said that, there are cases where a C-section is the right answer from both models' point of view. So you want those people to be there. But that means they're focused on interventions. They are pretty ignorant of natural childbirth and of breastfeeding.
Right.
So I think you have a story on the natural childbirth thing, right? Didn't
Yes.
you have nurses coming to they were curious, right? Am I remembering this right?
I'm not sure, but I would say that if the axiom we're working from is that birth is pathological, then it makes sense that nurses, doctors, everyone within that setting is trained to see birth as something that needs to be intervened on, and be very ignorant of the natural normal processes of birth. And I was amazed. I think I did an informal survey of nurses. Have you ever witnessed a natural childbirth? And the answer was almost always no.
Yeah,
I think,
that's what I was remembering. Yeah.
And I mean, I've been in the hospital 3 different times, and I get curious and I start asking questions. And I think I met one nurse that had seen a natural childbirth. So these people who are...
If they were oriented towards supporting the woman in giving birth without all these interventions, you'd think they'd at least get to witness one as part of their training. So they'd know what it looks like and would be able to support that, right? But that's just not even on the radar.
Giving birth in the hospital, it's just par for the course that these interventions are going to happen. If you give birth in the hospital, this is what's going to happen. And so they don't even know what it looks like to see a woman laboring, without these kinds of interventions. And the other thing that really surprised me was breastfeeding. There was a real lack of ignorance with breastfeeding in the hospital. And that was amazing too. So kind of sad.
Okay, Lambda has a great question before we leave this topic of the hospital birth scene. And I want to mention one other thing. are hospitals incentivized to become essential in this process? Well, the incentive to me seems pretty natural, which is that, this whole shift, if you do something more like we used to do 100 years ago, or the Netherlands still does now, well, that's a lot less money going to the hospital,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely.
They're only getting, as we'll see, a very small percentage of births ending up in the hospital, where it's really needed, right? And we could probably look at Netherlands stats, for example, to see that. So there would be births in the hospital, but it would be probably something like a few percentage points as opposed to the 95% that the US was at by the 1950s.
Right.
So, yeah, hospitals are going to be like, and OBs who are associated with hospitals, and really just the whole clan of they all sort of push you in this direction, and we got to experience that.
Yeah. Well, we've seen the bill.
Yeah, and one other thing I wanted to mention, just an analogy in terms of the interventions. Heather kind of implied it, but I want to draw this out. With my economics in the back of my head as we went through all this, I couldn't help but think of a certain analogy, which is that when you in economics, as Mises taught us, he has a paper called Middle of the Road Policy Leads to Socialism, in which he describes how you intervene in the economy, that causes these side effects, and then you could draw back and stop intervening, or what usually happens, they intervene again to deal with the side effects.
Right.
And then that produces side effects, and so on and so forth, right? And that's what he means. One intervention leads to another, leads to another.
Right.
Well, I couldn't help but think of that as we're going through this experience at the hospital, because once they do one thing, well, that causes a problem, and now they have to do another thing.
Right.
And so on and so forth, right? So here's a real simple practical example. We talked about Pitocin, and it's a bit harsher. Well, one of the things that happens is, rather than going into contractions naturally, which tend to be a little more gentle, the Pitocin can really slam you into contractions. Now, the mother's a lot more uncomfortable and a lot more likely, say, to want an epidural.
Absolutely. I wanted an epidural when I was induced. Are you kidding me?
Exactly.
It's uncomfortable.
So there's a simple example. They use Pitocin, and now they're doing an epidural. And it goes on and on and on. And you just are down the road.
Yeah.
The first birth experience, we didn't mention this. Our first birth experience was in the hospital.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was in the hospital.
And then we were like, okay, we want to try something different. One of the reasons is that one of the things they did, which our midwife never had to do, she used nutrition to avoid this problem. One of the things they did resulted in my wife being basically knocked out for the first 4 hours after the baby was born.
Yeah.
So I had the very special experience, though I didn't want to repeat it for the sake of my child and my wife. I had the very special experience in the first 24 hours of the newborn baby being with me instead of with my wife, because she was drugged out.
Yeah, and were you feeding
And I
her
was-
at all?
I don't know, it was the first 24 hours. But she was laying on my chest, sleeping. And I was sleeping with our first child, which was a treasured memory. Having said that, we tried to avoid that in the future, where Heather would not be drugged, and she would be able to really nurse and bond with that baby right away, immediately after birth.
I think it's helpful to pause and just talk about that first pregnancy and birth, just briefly, real quick.
Okay, and then we'll go into natural.
And then we'll go into natural birth, because so having had the experience of seeing this hippie mama when I was a teenager with a number of babies, she was tandem nursing. She had a newborn baby. She had a toddler who was nursing, 2.5-year-old who was nursing, and she had given birth at home. And I like I said, I just had this sort of visceral attraction to what she was doing. And I sort of just tucked that memory into the back of my mind. So when we got pregnant with our first, I was curious about natural birth, and I sort of aspired to give birth naturally. I think sometimes we women can put some romantic notions on what the ideal birth experience would be. But I went to my OB at the time and just expressed an interest. Do you guys work with midwives? Is there any support for natural birth here at this practice? And, I remember the OB, I think I asked that question to one of the other doctors, like maybe the nurse practitioner, and the OB all but stormed in. She rushed in and she said, "What's all this about a midwife?" And she was very defensive. And I remember being taken aback. And I just said, oh, well, I'm just interested and curious about natural birth. And she said, well, we don't do midwives here. And then she kind of went into scaremongering me into giving birth in the hospital. And I didn't know any better. And so I went ahead and gave birth in the hospital. Well, I could not have been more set up for failure in that whole process. And I ended up pushing while drugged for 4 hours straight. I was exhausted. By the end of it, I was just begging her to cut me open to get the baby out. I ended up with an unnecessary episiotomy, which is where they cut. It's just awful. It was Stephen, it was horrifying for him. He was in the delivery room, and then they drugged me, unbeknownst to me, with an anticonvulsive. I did have mild preeclampsia, mild. And I felt so awful. I felt like I had been hit by a truck. And I remember asking one of the doctors who was checking in on me after I'd given birth, I'm like, I feel really bad. Was this like really bad preeclampsia? And she said, no, this was mild preeclampsia. And it was so condescending. It was just so awful and very, very traumatic for me. And I just felt, I was ignorant, but I felt like the nurses and doctors sort of rubbed in the ignorance a little bit by saying, oh no, it's okay, honey. It was just very condescending, so that propelled me into making a rather unprecedented decision that I won't recommend that to people, which was that I never went back to that OB. I did my 6-week checkup and then fired her. I just never went back. And I began the search to give birth at home. So let me pause and talk about the midwifery model, because in giving birth at home, I did end up using a midwife. So
I'm going to switch and show that picture while we talk.
Which picture? Okay? The home birth picture?
The one I just showed you.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So the midwifery model. So this is me with our
in a pool.
So the midwifery model. Could you show my notes one more time, Stephen, with regard to the midwifery model? So the midwifery model of care of a woman respects and honors the differences that are natural in a woman's body. And one way it does this is with something that Ina May Gaskin, the midwife I referred to before, refers to as the sphincter law. Now, the sphincter law recognizes the cervix as a sphincter along with all the other excretory sphincters, okay? Right. And these sphincters function best, Gaskin points out, in an atmosphere of privacy and familiarity. So obtaining privacy in the hospital is nearly impossible. If you're having a normal, healthy pregnancy and yet choose to birth your baby in a hospital, you are going to be surrounded by at least a half a dozen people during and after the birth, right, most of whom you've never before met.
Right.
In addition,
they just start filing in.
They're filing in, okay? I mean, in addition, these sphincters do not respond to commands such as relax or push, okay? And can close up at any time if the person becomes frightened or humiliated. And I have heard women describe they labored at home until they got to like 7, even 8 centimeters, and then they rushed to the hospital and their labor stalls.
Mm-hmm. Well, tell that one story.
Oh,
you've got it in there.
I do. Yeah. Okay. Well, so a very extreme example of
just to illustrate the point.
So again, the cervix is the sphincter. Okay, and if a person becomes frightened or humiliated, it can close back up. Okay.
So, share the story.
I know. So perhaps the best example of this is from Gaskin's book of a woman who, while attempting to give birth, was frightened by the expression of the very young resident doctor delivering the baby when he saw what he thought was a horrible birth defect as the child was emerging. But all that was happening, so normally baby gives birth head down, but the baby actually was giving birth face first. It was presenting face first, okay?
So he was expecting the back of a head, and he was seeing like
the actual
bumps.
the eyes and nose and mouth coming.
And so he freaked out.
What he saw was this baby who was presenting face first, which is an unusual occurrence that he had not yet experienced.
There's nothing wrong with it. Yeah.
But the look, the expression of horror on his face so frightened the woman giving birth that her cervix simply tightened quickly, sucking the child back up into her uterus at such force that one of her ribs cracked. Okay.
So what does this mean? I'm trying to help men come in on this here.
Yeah.
It means like, try to imagine relaxing to have a bowel movement in a room where you're surrounded by like 6 people staring at you. Okay.
Going push.
Push. Yeah.
Push.
Come on, we're with you. Push. And you're like, could everyone just leave?
Can you just leave there? Yeah. Okay. All right. So sphincters function best with privacy and familiarity. And what's more familiar than home?
Right.
What's more familiar than home?
You make a space that you have a space that's comfortable for you.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Whatever that means for the woman, and that can look different for different women, right? But the point is, when you realize the sphincter law, then you realize that it is not irrelevant that your wife feels unsafe.
Right.
Right. That she feels uncomfortable. That it's too bright. I mean, whatever it is, all these things are relevant. She needs to relax. She needs to focus. She needs to push away all the distractions and be in the zone, right?
Okay.
So you need to facilitate that as her husband and protect her while she does this ultimately private thing of pushing a baby out, right?
So I love the way you put that, because it's an absolutely perfect segue to one of the things that comes up most strongly for people when they think about giving birth, which is pain. Okay, so we're going to talk about something that Ina May calls the pain-pleasure riddle. So I think it seems silly to have to state the obvious that babies come from having sex. Okay, and when you're having sex, privacy, maybe even the lights being dim, you set the mood. Okay, well, birth is very similar. You need the same movements help birth baby. In older cultures, the act of sort of like hula dancing, if you think about those swaying movements, you're sort of rocking the baby down. Okay, getting on, if you look at birthing icons or statues from tribal cultures, you can see the various positions that women are in. Sometimes they're on all fours, and which is a great way to give birth, and it's a great way to labor, actually, because it rocks the baby down. So, it's kind of silly and funny to say, but I have said to women who are preparing for birth, the same movements that helped you make this baby are the same movements that are going to get this baby out. Okay. And again, this is done best when a woman is feeling safe, when she has privacy,
when she's not strapped down,
not strapped down,
she can move the way she needs to move,
she can make noise.
Right.
Sometimes people make noises during sex. Okay.
Right.
Similar to giving birth. So these things are all connected. So
right. Yeah, unfortunately Hollywood doesn't do a great service to birth. They tend to show women like screaming,
Right.
But what I did see with my wife was her going,
yeah, or with an open mouth. Right. Yeah.
Right.
Good birthing noises. So now when I was pregnant, with our first child, women who had been through pregnancy and delivery felt like it was their duty to warn me of the horrendous pain that I was soon going to be going through. And I mean, even complete strangers would share their terrible experience. Thank God for drugs is what I would hear, Right. And it was discouraging, and it made it difficult to approach this impending conclusion of the pregnancy, with excitement and joy. And so I think Gaskin's insights concerning what she refers to as the pain-pleasure riddle are truly a revelation for those of us in this predicament. The tendency here is in the United States is to focus solely on how painful childbirth will be, and subsequently is.
Yeah, because you set yourself up for it.
You set yourself up.
You are set up for it by being put in a certain mental state of mind.
Well,
this is going to hurt, so you're tense.
Exactly. Right? So for many women, childbirth is indeed painful. And let me just say, it has been painful for me.
Yeah.
Okay. I have had pain in giving birth. So, however, what may surprise you is that some women have virtually painless births.
Yeah. You don't hear about that.
They
don't show that in the movies.
Well, exactly.
Right.
So I remember speaking to one woman whom we knew. She used to attend our church. And she said, and she was kind of shy as she was expressing this. And she said, I didn't really have any pain when giving birth. And I said, really? Tell me more about that. And she said, well, I just kind of had some pressure and kind of felt like maybe I had to go to the bathroom. And then I reached down and there was the baby's head. And
Right.
so she didn't really feel the kind of pain. Like, I don't even know if she really felt contractions other than like mild menstrual cramps or something.
Okay, guys, now the part that's going to blow your mind.
Okay, so still others. So some women do have pain, right? And there are times pain can inform you of something being wrong.
Right.
And the times when birth has been really painful for me, it's because there was a malposition of some kind. Something
Right.
was going wrong. So
And in some cases, you're talking about the baby being in a sort of an unusual position, but in
Right.
some cases, I think you were able to address it. Thinking about home births,
Yes.
or home births, the midwife would say, "Why don't you try getting in this position?" Then you'd
Right.
be like, "Okay, that's better. That's better."
right, exactly.
So your
Just
body's
shifting-
talking to you.
Yeah, because the baby is a body
Yeah.
within my body. And so moving my body around to different positions can help move the baby around and whatnot.
Right.
So
Good midwives will have a bunch of positions in their mind,
right.
and they'll say, "Let's try this. How does that feel?"
Yes, I know.
And then you're like, "Oh, now I've got it. Now it's
Well,
working."
Matt, so my first home birth with our second born, I only had prenatal care with the midwife. And so when it came time to give birth, I felt much better prepared but
Better informed.
But that was a complicated birth.
Yeah.
Madeline was what's referred to as a compound presentation. Sometimes the baby is coming through the birth canal with a hand next to their head. In her case, the umbilical cord was just really extra long and it was wrapped all around her body. And so she just wasn't descending. And so I got stuck at 9.5 centimeters for like 6 hours. And in the hospital, that would have been a done deal. I would have had a cesarean already, But the midwife knew a position to put me in to help get the baby down. And it essentially, I ended up rocking the baby down into position, and then I was able to give birth naturally at home. The labor start to finish was 16 hours, which is not an unusual length of labor. It was a little painful toward the end there because she was not descending. But again, the discomfort, the pain informed us that we needed to do some things to help the process along. In the hospital, what they do is they give you drugs or they cut you open. But at home, with the midwife, we were able to do some non-medical interventions, and that resulted in a good outcome.
And then I'll never forget when Madeline was born. She was
funny.
literally wrapped in the umbilical cord. So she's just been born, and I'm watching. I was with Heather, kind of up near Heather's head,
behind
and
me.
my sister and the midwife were down with the baby, and they're literally unwrapping the baby, spinning
It
her.
was like she was on a spit.
Yeah, spinning her, getting this umbilical cord off.
Yeah. And I was so, it was like such an amazing experience to do this. And then again, and this is kind of part of the pain pleasure riddle that Ina May talks about, and I'll get into that more specifically. After giving birth naturally with no drugs, no interventions, there's this rush of like this high, this rush of oxytocin, this natural oxytocin. And it was like I could have jumped from mountain to mountain. It was like I had all this amazing energy, after having given birth. So, but to go back to labor, to go back to this pain pleasure riddle, Stephen, can I see that part of my note?
Wait, you're skipping the fun part.
Oh, I'm sorry. You moved it up. He's moving things up. So, so some people experience painless births, but still others experience what can only be described as an orgasmic birth. So to try and understand these differences, Gaskin compares birth to another act that involves the same reproductive organs, sex. Sex, as experienced by a woman, can either be painful or pleasurable, mostly depending on her level of comfort and with her partner and her level of willingness. A lot depends on how ready she is for the experience, Gaskin states. Looked at from this perspective, it should be less surprising that there is such a wide variation in the way that different women describe the sensations of labor and birth. Labor pain is a far more subtle and changeable set of sensations than our cultural mythology admits. So we're not talking about feeling labor pain so much as a change in attitude that can alter our perception of it. Now, I have read testimonies of women who had orgasms during birth. I mean, one woman said all of labor was just like one big orgasm. Or, right when at the moment the baby was coming out, she had an orgasm, and she felt shy about it. She was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, did something go wrong?
Did something go wrong? Was this, And so I think the technomedical model really separates, what this process really is, the fact that these are our sexual reproductive parts, that this whole experience is using all of that. And I think that if we allow for nuances in the attitude with which we're approaching this experience of giving birth, then our actual experience of doing it can be a little more nuanced as well. It doesn't have to be so scary. We can look at it as even a pleasurable experience.
Right. So, we talk about psychosomatic, right? That there is not this disconnect where the mind is over there and the body is over there. Mind and body are in one person, right? And they can affect each other. You can think yourself into being sick.
Yeah.
This is well recognized, right?
Right.
And and within limits, you can think yourself into feeling better. I mean, you can't cure cancer with your mind, as far as we know. But there are some things you can address literally by changing your thinking, right?
Yeah.
And so that is what we're trying to bring home here, which is that how the mother feels is not irrelevant to how the birth goes.
Yes.
It can be all the difference between a birth that becomes very complicated and has all kinds of interventions and a birth that goes very smoothly. You can make all the difference, husbands.
Right.
Or young men who will be husbands.
So
you can make all the difference by providing a safe experience for your wife, protecting her. When people come at her when she's in a vulnerable state and start pressuring her, you say, back off. I think I want to talk to my wife alone. What do you want? What do you want, honey?
Yeah.
Do you want to do this intervention? Or do you want to try pushing a little longer? What do you want? Right? So you protect her during this time.
Yeah.
Were you going to address lambdas?
What was the...
Oh, I didn't know what you were going to talk about.
Oh, well, I wanted to talk about a couple things.
Okay.
For those women fortunate enough to be in the painless birth category, contractions can seem like an afterthought, like the lady at church. I mean, that was her firsthand testimony of what, labor and delivery,
wasn't a big deal.
was like for her. Just wasn't a big deal, And another woman friend of mine had a similar experience in that her labor lasted a mere 20 minutes from the first contraction to delivery of the baby. And this was her first baby.
Yeah.
So her body hadn't even, gone through that process.
You note in your article, first labors tend to be longer for most mothers. So that was extraordinary that she just 20 minutes, boom, she's done.
Right. So I do want to just talk a little bit about the picture. This is me in labor. I am in active labor, meaning I am beyond 4 or 5 centimeters along. In fact, there's
stages in labor.
Yeah, we'll talk about
early
that.
labor, and anyway.
Yeah. So I think I looked at the time stamp on this photo, and I had Judah in arms about an hour after this. So I am in active labor. I am working hard. I have enjoyed using a birthing pool. It's very relaxing. It's very warm. We keep the water really warm, and getting into that birthing pool just brings about relaxation. And again, and I'm in a very familiar setting. This was actually our breakfast room at our old house. And I had been preparing for this birth for months. We had been gathering the materials that we would need. We had the pool, set up in this room, maybe a week or so prior, and the other kids helped set things up. And so the familiarity, it's dark in the room. I think you're seeing a flash or something. That my sister must have been taking these pictures. So anyway, this being in this private place, being in my own home, and that it really helped. And Judah's birth, this was our 5th child, was probably my absolute easiest labor from start to finish.
Right. Yeah, there were no compound birth or anything.
No, I mean it was really, really easy. So now, granted, the majority of women are not going to fall into the category of painless birth or orgasmic birth, and you will experience some amount of discomfort during labor and birth. If you choose a hospital birth, you're going to be under the thumb of that technomedical approach, which does not cater to women in labor.
Right.
Hospital policies, like not being allowed to eat during labor, not being able to be submerged in water to cope with contractions, putting a time limit on the labor, being made to lie on your back, being surrounded by strangers, and this is going to greatly add to the discomfort. Okay.
And worth noting that things have been shifting.
Yes.
And we are hearing about hospitals that have a pool in labor and delivery for women to be in.
Yes.
So, you have to look around to see what your options are.
A few years
but
ago.
it's not quite what it was in the 50s, where it was probably at its worst, I think.
Oh, it's nowhere near what it was in the 50s.
The techno-medical model was at its height in the 50s, and now you can find more options.
Yeah, it's been slow. The changes have been very slow. There were a few years ago, there were protests around numerous hospitals here in St. Louis by women, saying enough. Yeah. Enough. And it was after those protests that one of the major hospitals here in St. Louis opened up a birthing center attached to its hospital and started hiring licensed midwives.
Right.
So, they're listening. We're talking and they're listening. So if you choose a home birth, with a midwife, you're going to be in familiar surroundings with privacy. You're going to be allowed to move around and get in the bath if that helps you. I spent time in the shower, sometimes just the warm shower. You can eat, sleep, go to the bathroom without having to roll around an IV hookup, which can be cumbersome while you're laboring. You can let gravity work for you, and you can give birth the way that women have for centuries, squatting on your hand or on your hands and knees. All these things add up to alleviating labor pain and speeding up the process, since it's easier to stay relaxed when you're not on the doctor's clock or hindered from letting your body be your guide.
Okay, so let's talk about then the spectrum of ways to give birth. I would say there's two extremes. One is a C-section. You don't even push the baby out vaginally.
You opt for that. You're saying you're not talking about emergency. You're saying, I just want to have this baby cut out of me.
Yeah, okay. I guess that's the most extreme, right?
Yeah.
So at one extreme, you have the scheduled C-section. I don't even want to try to do anything natural. Just cut me up and take it out. At the other extreme, you have the unattended home birth. You don't even have a midwife. By unattended, it doesn't mean no one's there. Probably husband, family are there or something. But the woman gives birth without a midwife present. My main hope in doing this is that you start learning the spectrum and that you have options, and that you can slide between those options as circumstances change. Because I see a lot of black and white thinking about this. Well, but what if something goes wrong if we start a home birth? Well, you can transfer to the hospital. Yeah. Have a midwife there. Midwives can deal with a lot of emergencies on their own without going to the hospital. So you can slide even within your house on the spectrum, right? From, a totally natural birth to the midwife intervening in some way and helping.
Yeah.
Or you can just transfer to a hospital. One advantage of a birthing center, this is kind of a new thing that's happening, but they're popping up. Look around. One advantage of a birthing center is there's some people there who can help if you need something more like some intervention, right? Or the birthing center might be attached to or near a hospital, so the transfer is more convenient. So I wouldn't want anybody to leave this thinking that the two of us are pushing you to do a certain thing on the spectrum. It's more like learn the spectrum, get informed, and then choose what you'd like to try based on risk factors and so on and so forth. Consult with the midwife, for example. And they can say, I'm not sure this is a good idea to try to do a home birth because of this, or this. And they will steer you away from it if they think it's not a safe option.
Right.
So, look over the spectrum, pick where you want to be, but then don't get too attached to it. Don't be like, here's my perfect birth. There's candlelight, there's incense burning, there's, Indian music strumming or whatever, right? And that's how it's going to look. No. We're going to get this baby out and mommy and baby are going to be healthy. That's our goal, right? Everything else is instrumental towards that goal and can be sacrificed at a moment's notice if need be, right? That is, okay, this isn't working. We are going to switch this up.
Yeah, which we did.
And which we experienced.
Yeah, so our sixth, I grew a rather big baby with our
Though that was not the issue, to be fair.
No, it wasn't the issue. The issue was that he was malpositioned. So with our sixth, by that time, I was back under the care of an OB, while also being seen by a midwife. And the pregnancy was uneventful. I mean, I had fairly easy pregnancies. My only major complication in any of my pregnancies was that I experienced varicose veins, which is a genetic predisposition to weak walls, vein walls. And so a woman, when she's pregnant, increases her blood volume significantly. And so with that blood volume increase, my veins would stretch and my vein walls were weak, and so couldn't support all the extra blood. And so I would have bulging of my veins, and I had to wear compression hose. And it's very painful having varicose veins. It is so painful. Oh my goodness. So that was really the only complication, but I forget why I was under the care of an OB. I think I had my first miscarriage prior to our sixth. So anyway, as we're getting toward the end of the pregnancy, I just remember feeling like his position didn't feel normal to me. And I remember asking the OB, are you sure he's head down? Are you sure he's head down? Well, he may have been in the office, but you know, babies can move around even toward the end. And maybe it happened while I was asleep. I don't know. Nevertheless, he was not head down. And so we started at home, and about 19 hours or so into labor, which was not normal for me. My labors tended to be 5 hours, 7 hours, 4 hours, I mean, really. And even with bigger babies, our third born was 9 pounds, 11 ounces, born at home, 5-hour labor total, born into a birthing pool, no issues at all. So this was, I knew something was up. And so I said to the midwife, I said, I think you should break my waters. I think you should break my sac of waters to try to get this baby to be up against my cervix more. Something is not allowing this child to descend. And when she did that and fell, she got legs. She was legs. So he was not footling breech. He was actually sitting cross-legged on my cervix. And there was just no way I was getting this child out at home. So I think we've got that. That's from our third born. That was the 5-hour, this new picture that Stephen's going to put up. That was our fairly easy 5-hour labor with a 9 pound, 11 ounce baby that Stephen's going to show you here in just a minute.
Yeah.
So anyway, with our sixth, we decided to go ahead and transfer to the hospital. And when we got there, just the stress of transferring, my final stage of labor kicked in on the way, and I was in a tremendous amount of pain. I mean, I have never experienced pain like this before in my life. I was begging them to cut the baby out of me. It's kind of embarrassing looking back, but I mean, I was in a lot of pain.
Yeah.
Anyway, what was happening was that I was reverse dilating. I went from 9.5 centimeters to like 8.
Losing progress.
I was losing progress. My cervix was swelling, and baby was malpositioned. And so, they were really lovely there at the hospital with this transfer. They knew I was attempting to birth at home. They weren't mean about it. They were very supportive. They said at this particular hospital, they knew how to deliver breech and they would be glad to attempt it, given that he was my sixth baby and I had been tried, as they like to say. But it just wasn't happening. So that ended in a cesarean. And, that was the best outcome for that particular birth, but again, it was really stressful. I mean, having to transfer, it definitely was stressful.
Yeah.
So.
But it can be done.
It can be done.
Let's see. So bear in mind this spectrum that you've got all these options. You do not have to do it a certain way, and you can adjust based on safety factors and so forth.
I think this is a really good question.
Okay, good. Let's take this from Mickey.
Mickey, do you see any difference in behavior and overall comfort of the babies after the birth, coming out of home and out of hospital?
Versus out of the hospital.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Tell about that. Oh, yeah. So, sorry.
Yeah.
I want you to be aware of the spectrum, but there are trade-offs. And there are trade-offs for the comfort and health of the mother and the baby. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, well, so with our first, again, I was coming from a place of ignorance. They had drugged me. And so I actually wasn't even able to hold her, physically able to hold her. And I was experiencing side effects from the medications. My eyes kept, I don't know, it was really bizarre. I was having like neurological kinds of effects from this medication. I was basically rendered unable to mother this baby. And I was a new mother, so I was feeling insecure. And by the second day of being in the hospital, she was becoming dehydrated. I was distraught because I was trying to nurse. I was trying to breastfeed for the first time. and she was lethargic. And she experienced prolonged jaundice, which her jaundice lasted for 3 months. They kept, wanting to stick her heel over and over and over
Oh,
again.
yeah,
I mean,
I
they were
forgot about that.
causing her pain.
Oh,
And what was really interesting is that our pediatrician had never heard of prolonged jaundice. But when I went to the La Leche League, they got out their information and they were like, "Oh yes, this is prolonged jaundice. It'll clear up in 3 months. Don't worry about it. And you can say no if you don't want them to prick her heel anymore. Just put a stop to it, Heather." And so I got support from them. And sure enough, at the 3-month mark, her jaundice cleared up and she was fine. And so they were just hugely supportive of me.
yeah. So when you put drugs in the mom, the drugs go into the baby.
Yeah.
The newborn baby will be lethargic instead of
Alert.
in a natural birth where you don't have complications and so forth. The baby is alert. Will actually like move their head around,
Oh, yeah.
and will be looking to nurse with mommy right away.
Yeah, they can nurse right away. I think I mostly noticed just that they were just much more alert.
Yeah. Yeah,
Being
and
at home.
and we don't have any studies on the long-term effects of the baby getting
Yeah,
drugged
I'm not prepared
during
with that.
birth. So
Yeah. So
okay, so
I
let's
don't want to
see.
go over any of those statistics
Why not?
because,
I think that we should.
well, I don't.
You don't
I mean,
think
these
that-
are old. These are 20 years old. These statistics.
That's fine.
I
I was wanting to make sure to give people the idea of if you don't go with that model, how likely is it that you just can have a birth at home and not have
Yeah.
these problems? Because C-sections are at 25% in the U.S.
right.
Bizarrely, they're at like 95% in Brazil. Still trying to figure out
Yeah.
the story on that.
So what
So-
Stephen's wanting me to share is just some of the statistics from the farm, which is this. So when Ina May,
Small sample set, 2,000 pregnancies, but it gives you an inkling of how much you can just have a regular birth and not have to have all this stuff going on.
right, yeah. So their births completed at home, not in the hospital. And so people were actually coming to the farm and giving birth. So 95% of the people that came there to give birth between 1970 and 2000 did not need to transfer. 95% of them were born there. They did have a few emergency transports to the hospital, 1.3%. Their cesarean rate was 1.4%, and 61% of those were first-time mothers. So,
Yeah, so 1.4% working with midwives of C-sections, as opposed to 1 out of 4 odds if you go to
Right.
the hospital.
now they bring up
Think
forceps
about that.
delivery, which forceps are not typically used anymore.
Yeah,
okay?
nobody really does
Yeah,
that.
nobody really does that. So I don't know if that's important to
That's fine.
share.
Skip that.
Inductions, only 5%. So no synthetic drugs.
Yeah, there's
were
natural
used.
ways to.
There are natural ways, but there were no synthetic drug, only 5%
Right.
inductions. 15 sets of twins, all vaginally born,
Yeah.
which is almost unheard of these days.
Yeah.
They lost no mothers. They had
Right.
a zero maternal mortality. And they lost 8 babies. 4 occurred during their first week of life.
Yeah. Some babies are not viable, unfortunately.
Yeah, so, and
That-
we don't know, and again,
That
I don't
can
know
be-
why.
That can be separate from birth. That
Yeah.
can be a genetic defect.
Yeah, I don't know why that happened. So I think those are really, good statistics.
They're startling.
You know?
I mean, when you
Right.
go to the hospital and you're just seeing C-section after C-section,
And I have some
and the
recent
farm is
stats.
doing 1%.
If you can go to my recent stats that I pulled up
Oh.
on the other.
Okay.
I really put Stephen to
We
work.
have a lot of documents here.
Yeah, so from the American Association, I forget what ACOG stands for.
Okay.
So anyway, in the United States, 24% cesarean rate in the hospital versus only 5% of transfers.
24.7. So my 25% was just slightly rounding. So
Yeah.
about 1 out of 4 C-section
Right.
versus 5% for
Yeah,
home birth.
and according to their statistics, there are about 35,000 home births a year, according to them. These are home births that have been reported to them in the United States.
Oh, yeah. Right.
But there are a number of states where home birth is illegal.
It was for our first 3
Yeah,
in
illegal.
our state of Missouri.
Right, exactly. So, and only 1/4 of those 35,000 that they have on record are unassisted or unattended home births. So the majority of home births are attended by
like a midwife.
A midwife or some kind of qualified assistant. We used to have a doctor in Missouri that everybody loved.
Right.
And he would catch babies at home.
I'm just going to switch pictures up as we talk here.
Oh, this is a fun picture.
Yeah, that's our first 4 while you're about to be in labor with our 5th.
I am in labor.
You're in labor with our 5th.
Yeah, so we'll wait till you guys get this next picture. This is a really...
go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so this is, let's see, it was about 7:30 at night that this was taken. I'm in the birthing pool. I'm wearing a swimsuit top. And these are our first 4 kiddos. Our youngest, the little redhead there, would have been 2 years old. And then the next one up would have been 4, and then 5 and 6.
Yeah.
So, and our 5th was born, I think, an hour to an hour and a half after this.
Right.
So
they were taking a picture before they went off to be with someone else.
Yeah. Some people have their children at home with them giving birth, and I just didn't feel comfortable with that.
Too distracting.
Yeah, exactly. So,
so in contrast to those stats, 5%, 1% to 5% C-sections. We have noted here that hospital births, there's a 90% epidural rate. We already mentioned the 25% C-section rate. They're resistant to vaginal birth after cesarean. That's mostly what I wanted to share there.
Yeah, there was something else on the other page that you hid.
This one?
So their current stats right now are 30% induction of labor in the hospital.
So what did I have?
I don't know.
I had 90%
that's
epidural.
Epidural, right. So 30%, I that surprised me. I thought it would be much higher than that. Mainly because every time I was in the hospital.
You got induced, That was your experience.
Well, except for our transfer. I was not I was already well into labor with that. So, but anyway, I think that home birth is beginning to be on the radar of the medical community, and they're starting to see that women are sort of taking birth back, and so hopefully we'll begin to see, more research about that. And here's something that really struck me, and this kind of gives a nod back to what we started our talk with, which is this idea of women wanting to give birth or not. And, men, the young men at the conference coming up and saying, what they're encountering when going out on dates is that women are not wanting to give birth. But
not wanting to have babies.
Not wanting to have babies, right. But from Pew Research, women in the United States and Europe want more children than they actually have, which I found really interesting. And I just wonder if there was more support, if there was a different attitude about birth and pregnancy, that women would feel more safe going ahead and giving birth,
I think it's a piece of the puzzle that doesn't get discussed in our circles, right? But there's a lot of antinatalist stuff going on,
right?
And I think this is part of the story that I'd like to get it onto the table.
A few more things about home birth before I do want to talk about our twins' birth, which was in the hospital. But a couple more things about home birth. I have to say, I really enjoyed giving birth at home. But I would never have done it without an educated, experienced midwife. I mean, that to me personally was really important to me. I mean, and the tenderness with which the midwife treated me was just so sweet and kind.
She was great.
I remember before she left after my first...
She was calm.
She was so calm.
Always calm.
And she was motherly toward me.
Right.
And that to me... This whole idea of older women caring for their younger women and mentoring them, was certainly embodied in my experience in dealing with a midwife. And, I remember my first home birth, which was with our second child. She tucked me in with the little baby right next to me in the bed that we had prepared. And she kissed my forehead and she said, "I'll see you tomorrow." And she came back and checked on me the next day. And then she did all the newborn checks. And I, obviously we went to a doctor after that and the baby was seen and all those well-child checks happened and everything.
Right.
But it was just the tenderness and just her wisdom, and steadiness was so amazing. And I don't know. I felt loved and cared for,
Yeah.
which is not something that I felt in the hospital.
Right.
It's not that I mean, certainly with the twins birth, I think that was probably the most positive birth experience
Yeah.
in the hospital, but there were negative things about it, which I do want to talk about. So do you want to pull up one of the twins?
This one?
Yeah. So with the twins birth, we did not start at home at all. I had actually had 2 miscarriages prior to the twins. So, and one was a rather complicated miscarriage. And Stephen had suggested when we were preparing for this talk that maybe we would maybe do another stream just about miscarriage, because I have had a number of them. And it's not something that is really talked about very much. So I had a rather complicated miscarriage that went on for 4 months, and I ended up having to have a couple of surgeries to help me deal with it. And so I was actually quite shocked when we got pregnant with the twins, because I guess I kind of just thought that my body just wasn't going to be able to do that anymore. And so we got pregnant, and I was 40. And so we went to the OB, and we found out right away that we were having twins. And then we found out
identical twins. They knew at 9 weeks that they were identical twins, which I thought was pretty cool.
It was pretty cool. So we knew right off the bat that this was a high-risk pregnancy, because the twins were identical. They were sharing a placenta, although they were in 2 separate amniotic sacs, which is good. It makes it less risky. But one of the things that can develop with identical twins who share a placenta is that they can develop twin-to-twin transfusion syndrome, where there are abnormal blood vessels that get shared between the twins, and one twin essentially ends up getting more blood, more nutrition than the other twin. And if it happens early in the pregnancy, you can lose both of them. If it happens later in the pregnancy, it normally results in some kind of a surgical birth, a cesarean with an early delivery or something like that. And we just really were blessed in that the doctor that I ended up using for this pregnancy was Dr. Vlastos. He's now in Kansas. And he is one of the forerunners of developing an in utero surgery where they sever the abnormal connections between the 2 babies, allowing for more normal growth to happen, or at least for them to get far enough along in gestation that the pregnancy is viable, and then they can save those babies. So he's amazing. And it was just like a miracle that I ended up having him deliver our baby. So from the beginning, I felt his support. I felt like he really listened. He was familiar with a natural birth from delivering the babies of his wife. And so it was just an overall good experience working with him. Now, having said that, it was in the hospital. And again, my body was not my own. So I'm going to tell you the ways that I was able to have control over my body, autonomy over my body, and then a way that I wasn't. The way that I was is that, again, Dr. Vlastos really listened to me. And I said, look, here's how it's going to go down. I know that these babies, we've got to get them out. They were, the twin-to-twin transfusion syndrome was progressing, and it was time. I made it to 36 weeks gestation. And I just was not, I could feel it in my gut that it was time to deliver these babies. And
36 weeks for twins is fine.
It's basically full term.
Yeah, that's good.
So I knew I had to be induced because I was not in labor, and we needed these babies to get out. And we knew, and he was honoring my request for a VBAC, a vaginal birth, after having had a cesarean. So I said to him, look, I know you're going to give me Pitocin. Once my body starts laboring on its own, stop that Pitocin. I'm going to dilate in 1 hour, and then we're going to go into the OR. So don't leave, okay? And that is exactly what happened, because I know my body. I know what my body's going to do. And so he really honored that. I did have an epidural, which was just in case we needed to get in there quickly and get the baby out, because the second baby was feet first.
Right.
And so anyway, it was a wonderful delivery. He trained 2 other OBs, and then that's where I come to the negative part. When you're in the hospital, it may not occur to doctors that they need to ask permission to touch your body. And so I was wheeled into the OR, and one of the doctors there introduced himself, and then immediately, without saying anything else,
Like warning you, or
there was no warning. He just said, "Hi, my name's Dr. So and so," and then he stuck his hand and put it right in my vagina, and I actually jumped, and I was quite startled, and then I started to have an emotional reaction to being touched in this way, and then I remember going, "Okay, Heather, you just got to do what you came here to do. You can deal with the emotional repercussions of what just happened later, and you need to be focused and give birth." And I think again, this has to do with the lack of training of the doctors. They just don't see your body as being yours once you're in that hospital. And because birth is viewed as pathological, they're like ready to jump in there and intervene.
Right.
And of course,
and they're not thinking about keeping the mother relaxed and
all that stuff. So again, we had a good outcome. We had a successful VBAC. The babies were okay. They were more than
switch to that
okay.
picture. Okay.
Yeah, the babies were more than okay. But if you can see in this picture, can they see the picture yet?
Yes.
Okay. Lucy is our baby with the purple hat, and her face is really red. She was the one who was receiving too much blood. And more nutrition. And then Miriam is the green hat, and she's super, super pale because she wasn't getting enough.
Right. So this is the twin-to-twin transfusion, and Miriam, Lucy was born at 5 pounds 4 ounces, and Miriam was born at 4 pounds 5 ounces. So Lucy was getting more from they shared a placenta.
Right.
That's how this happens. They shared a placenta. Lucy's umbilical cord was like plugged into the center of the placenta, and Miriam's was sort of off on the edge.
Yeah, it's on the margin.
Lucy on the margin. So Lucy was getting more, Miriam was getting less. And I said, "Oh, so that must be very dangerous." When they explained this to us, I said, "This must be very dangerous for the baby who's over on the margin." They said, "Oh, it's dangerous for both of them."
Yeah.
The one on the margin is not getting the nourishment they need. The one in the center is getting too much.
Yeah.
Because the body's producing enough for both babies, but more of it is going to the one that's more centrally plugged in there. And so the one who is getting more can have a heart attack.
Yeah.
So it is quite common for twin-to-twin transfusion to result in losing one or both of the twins.
Yeah.
Depends on how early things start. Anyway, we came out fine. We had the different colored hats. We had little things to go on their wrists. Their little wrists were too tiny, so we put them on their ankles. Color-coded bracelets, because we were afraid they're identical, right? We were afraid we'd mix them up. Well, they look different immediately.
They did.
And ever since, we can tell them apart because Lucy has, to my eyes, sort of a slightly wider face or something, and Miriam has a sort of slightly more narrow face.
She's more like petite or something.
Yeah, more of a petite look.
Although I have pictures of them.
But they're subtle.
I have pictures of them when they're babies.
And
like
you can't
6
tell
months.
anymore.
No, I can't.
Yeah.
I can't.
If we don't have the green or the purple
I'm
to
like,
mark
oh my
we
gosh,
can't
who
tell.
is this baby? So anyway, I mean, it was a good outcome, but again, it was in the hospital, and I needed to be in the hospital, and I'm grateful, so grateful to the medical staff for their support, and we had a really good outcome, and it was wonderful. We did have one further complication with this pregnancy, which is that my placenta did not detach. And that is a complication that can happen whether you're at home or in the hospital, whether you're giving birth to a singleton or twins. And again, if you have a trained midwife would be able to recognize that if the placenta, that is a medical emergency and you would need to transfer even after the baby is born to get that dealt with. So they knew how to deal with that for me there in the hospital, and it was uncomfortable. But it was overall a good outcome.
So a couple random things, and then we'll move towards wrapping up. One thing I wanted to share is a piece of wisdom we got from the Orthodox Jewish community, which is that they always wait until 12 weeks, which is the end of the first trimester, before sharing with anyone about the pregnancy. Why? Because most miscarriages happen well before 12 weeks. We had a number of miscarriages. They were typically at 7 weeks, 8 weeks,
I had 2 that were late first trimester, and those ended up being complicated.
Right. But if you make it to about 12 weeks, then you're pretty safe to share the news. And in fact, with some of these later pregnancies, like with the twins, it was pretty hard to wait till 12 weeks. You were having to wear baggy clothes because it was already becoming apparent.
I asked my midwife about that. I said, what's going on here? Like, now that I've given birth a couple times, I look like I'm, 4 or 5 months pregnant at 10 weeks pregnant.
Right.
And she was so funny. She said, well, your muscles kind of just assume the position. I'm like, great.
So that's just a piece of wisdom. And of course, it's for protecting your wife. We share the news excitedly that we're going to have a baby, and then the baby dies. Miscarriages happen.
Yeah.
And it's just awkward, right? We think that people should talk more about miscarriages, but I think we ought to be in control of who we talk to about it and so forth. So it's a way of just keeping your wife safe, in particular. And then let's see, we had a few thoughts about preparing for birth.
Mm-hmm.
Enjoy being pregnant.
Yeah.
It's quite an amazing experience.
It is amazing. When you feel that first flutter of the movement, I don't know, being pregnant is amazing.
Read Guide to Childbirth, but I'm going to go back, I guess, to here. So we can have better view. Okay. Yeah. So read Guide to Childbirth by Anna Meg Askin.
Yeah.
That'll give you a lot of great knowledge.
Be prepared. There's some hippie stuff in there, and some stuff that may make you blush.
Yeah. Right. But it is useful to gain knowledge.
Birth is a part of our sexual experience.
Nutrition can avoid a number of pregnancy complications. So lower sugar intake, additional calories, can avoid a number of problems. That's how we avoided in later pregnancies the problem we had in the first pregnancy. Is that my midwife said, "Oh, you just needed to change your nutrition, then you wouldn't have had that problem, right?" So you need to know how to eat properly during the birth.
Right.
Prenatal care with an OB or a midwife, or however you choose to do that is a good idea.
Yeah. They can help pinpoint red flags. They can help you know. I mean, I usually waited until 36 weeks. If there were no complications with the pregnancy by 36 weeks, then I would be released to go ahead and birth at home.
Home birth videos. So get those damn Hollywood movie births out of your mind. They don't help you. They make them all seem like traumatic.
What really cracks me up is like the woman is suddenly in active labor. Oh my gosh!
Yeah,
and then it's like, wait, what? Were you not in labor like this whole time?
Yeah. It's really unrealistic. So you can find births that people have shared of videos that people have shared of their births.
Yeah.
And Heather found that when she was pregnant, she liked watching those birth videos.
I did. It's like getting my head in the game.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it informs you. It shows you more what it's really like. It's more realistic. And if you watch some nice, calm home birth videos, then it helps you start to picture that this is not going to be a crisis.
Right.
You're going to be calm. This is going to be beautiful. That's the mindset mom needs to be.
Well, and I think it sets expectations realistically. Okay, labor just doesn't happen all at once. There are stages. You can be in stage 1 of labor, which is going from no dilation to 3 centimeters dilated for days. You can be just having contractions irregularly or sometimes regularly, and that can just go on. It's really once you get into active labor, which is from 3 centimeters and up until you're fully dilated. That's active labor, and that's going to require more attention from you, more focus from you. But even then, I mean, I was leaning on the counter taking bites of yogurt while I was in active labor, making sure I was taking drinks of electrolyte drinks and things to keep my strength up. And then the third stage of labor is when you're actually delivering the baby, when you go through what's called transition. So you're transitioning from the dilating. You're already dilated, and so now you're going to transition to pushing the baby out. And the best way I can describe that is it's when you get these pushing contractions, it feels like throwing down is the best way that I know that probably sounds kind of funny, but like when you're going to throw up, you can't you can try to suppress that, but it's really difficult. Well, pushing contractions feel like throwing down. It's like it's this involuntary thing that happens with your body, and you just want to cooperate with it. So yeah. And then the actual giving birth, I think this is important to say, and this is something that Ina May emphasizes with her sphincter law, the relaxation. If you're uptight about something, you might clench your teeth. You know, if you're angry about something, if you're upset about something, if you're in an unfamiliar surrounding, you might cross your arms. You tend to be closed in. Well, that is the exact opposite of what you need in order to give birth. You need to be open, okay? Open mouth, open jaw, open body, open cervix. You're going to have less pain. You're going to have less discomfort. Vocalizing, as Stephen pointed out earlier, there are good birthing noises. It's like a low hum with your mouth open. And you as you get later on into your labor, you know, it can almost look like, if you're watching your wife laboring, it can almost look like she's in a trance, because she kind of is.
Right.
You have to sort of go into this place inside yourself and find that inner strength in order to be able to bring this life forth, you know, and no one can do it for you. You know, you have to be willing to go there, to open yourself, to surrender to the process of giving birth. And the other thing that I think is really helpful that Anime points out is that contractions, she thinks of them more like waves. And they start, and then there's a crescendo, and then they peak, and then they come back down. And so labor is just riding those waves until you get to the shore of giving birth, you know. And it sounds kind of silly to say, but having done it numerous times, it's true. It's so helpful and true to see the contractions not as an enemy, and contraction, just the word contraction is just all wrong. When something contracts, it closes. We want to open.
Right. Good
we
point.
want to open.
Yeah.
So I love her jargon of riding the waves, or rushes. I've heard her use the word rushes. Oh, here comes another rush, and then it comes, and then, you know, and then it releases. So and as you get closer to actually delivering the baby, you might have 2 waves in a row, you know. So anyway, it's a great visual, and I think it's a great way to sort of shift the mindset into actual relaxing and giving birth.
Okay, so let's discuss some super chats, and then there was one comment I wanted to address. So Truck Bro and Chris Crawford sent some super chats without any comment. Thank you, sirs. Tyler says, glad you're doing the stream. Looking forward to catching up after work. Tyler Santinelli, thank you. Lambda, how does the Bible inform your expectations and understanding of childbirth?
Oh, wow. That's an interesting question. I think for me, I guess the scripture that comes to mind is that we're fearfully and wonderfully made, and that God made our bodies. He designed our bodies with the purpose of giving birth. You know, a woman's body is designed to do this, and I can trust God's design for my body and giving birth. I think that's probably the primary thing. That's a deep question, and I probably want to sit with it more to come up with a better answer. Yeah.
Okay, Mickey, we already discussed. He asked about how babies do coming out of a home birth versus a hospital birth. And then our friend Yiz, that we just got to meet in person, says, I'm busy with family today, can't stay but a moment, but wanted to pop in and send appreciation for what you do for our people. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh, so there was one other question I caught. I'm not even sure if I can find who it was. Roderick, maybe. He had asked about if we could come back around to weights of, it was weights? Something else.
Weights of the babies?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So we can reel those off. We already explained that our number 6 was our big baby.
10 pounds,
10
1
pounds,
ounce.
1 ounce. That was our biggest. But then our first son was 9 pounds, 11 ounces.
Yeah. I know all the
so
weights.
also very big.
Do you know I know all the weights?
Yeah, I think I do too.
You do?
Actually, I'm not sure. And then the twins were our smallest.
Yeah.
Right. 5 pounds 4, and then our very smallest was Miriam. 4 pounds 5.
Yeah, isn't that fun? 5, 4, and 4, 5.
4, 5.
Yeah.
And then our first baby.
6, 7.
Second baby.
8, 1.
And then let's see, we missed.
Third baby was 9, 11.
Third baby we did.
A 5-hour labor, super easy labor.
Yeah.
Fourth baby, 8, 8, and that was the baby that you mentioned that the midwife was offering me wine. It was Christmas Eve, folks. Okay.
Yeah, that was crazy.
I went into labor on the way.
He was born an hour before Christmas Day.
I went into labor on the way to my mother's house, and you know, every time I had a contraction, people were like, you know, like and I absorbed some of that tension.
Mm-hmm.
And it was cold, and anyway, we had to rush home to give birth, and it was just kind of intense. It was only a 7-hour labor, but it's kind of intense. So anyway, he was eight. That was fourth. Our fifth born. We showed you one of those pictures where the children were around me in the birthing pool. 7, 10. Super. Oh, he was so easy. He's kind of an easy kid too. And then our sixth was 10, 1.
And then the twins.
And then the twins were
Number
5, 4, and 4, 5. And I have to tell you, our sixth, he is a truck.
Yeah. It's that big.
He's just got such athletic
That
build.
boy who was born at the heaviest birth weight is a big kid. He's going to be big.
Yeah.
Just his build.
Yeah.
In fact, I remember with each child, I have a narrower build. And then my dad, Heather's brother, my brother, they all have more barrel chested. And I remember as I would hold each baby under their armpits, right, with my arms around their chest, I could tell which build it was immediately. The first time I would hold a newborn, I could feel, oh, okay, this is more that narrow build. Oh, this is that, with Caleb, that's that big build.
Well, what's really funny?
Right away.
One of the skills that's been lost with the medical profession, but midwives have retained, is the external palpitation of the womb. So what this means is that she would basically put her hands on my belly and feel around for the baby. And I remember when we were pregnant with our fourth, and he's more built like you, she actually felt around and she said, oh, this one's got more narrow build. And I'm like, oh, they'll look like two. The fact that she could feel that through, into my womb was just amazing.
From externally,
Yeah, exactly. So,
okay, well, we could go on and on, but I think we've covered everything.
We covered our whole, our list of things that we wanted to talk about.
I think so.
Okay.
I'm just double checking for any last chats. I think I got everything. And then let's see, any last things? No, I think we covered the main things. The hope with this stream, and I hope what you're left with is that being informed is helpful. Learning, doing a little reading, taking the fear out of it. That's what was hoping. That was sort of the main purpose in my mind of this stream, is learn that normal natural birth is what you can have 95% of the time, or something like that. Very high percentage of the time, you do not need to do all this hospital stuff, all these interventions, I should say. Where you choose to give birth, of course, is, you should make a decision that feels right for you and your child and everything. But mostly, I would love it that the result of this stream is that we have some informed dads who protect their wives, and some moms who go into birth feeling more confident, more joyful about it, welcoming it as opposed to dreading it.
Yes.
I mean, let's not forget that this is a big deal.
Yeah,
right? It's a big, joyful deal. And you talked about how after you had your first baby, the first time you gave birth to a new life, talk about that, how significant that was.
Oh, well, I just had this amazing feeling that everything that I had done to this point just paled in comparison, that it was insignificant. Like that giving birth to a human being was the most important thing that I had ever done. And
she'd gotten degrees, she'd started a private practice, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And this just was so
big. I'm grateful to you, Stephen, just for you being so supportive in terms of, listening to me and supporting me in giving birth at home, supporting me in giving birth in the hospital, wanting me to feel safe and comfortable. And I have to say, a lot of progress has been made in the hospitals. There are still a number of states where home birth is illegal, and I have a link that we can share to that. I don't know how we could do that, but
share a link to which?
Yeah, this you go down at the bottom. So
I'll share it now.
Home birth is still illegal in Arkansas, Alabama, Illinois, Iowa, Kentucky, Nebraska, North Carolina, and South Dakota. As of right now, the laws and regulations related to Michigan are still being drafted. In Missouri, home birthing is now legal, and direct entry midwives are finally legal. And Stephen's going to share a link.
Is this the right link?
Where you can
state
click
by state?
You can click on your state, and you can find out what the laws are in your state. And then, if you feel so led, help empower other women by writing to your state legislature, help increase the number of choices for women and help change laws in the hospitals, help change hospital policy so that women can feel more safe and more supported. We need more birthing centers opening up. Birthing centers are kind of the best of both worlds, where you can get a quick and easy transfer if there's an issue, but you still have a setting that's like home, and knowledgeable birth attendants who know what a normal, natural laboring woman looks like. I mean, my midwife could tell what stage of labor I was in, not by asking me questions, not by checking my cervix, by just watching me, by looking at me. A woman's cervix is like the last thing that you should need to do to check and see how far along she's in labor. If you really understand labor and delivery, then you can just look at a woman and know, or maybe even ask her questions or talk to her and know what's going on. So I think we need doctors to be more educated. And, I will say for my part, I am friends with a woman who's been very active in the Cesarean Awareness Network. And I actually had an opportunity many years ago to speak to a room of OBs in training at Washington University and describe to them what my experience was in the hospital and the negative aspects of that versus what my experience was at home. And so I have jumped on that opportunity because I could help to educate them and help them to provide better care for their patients. So, if there's there may be ways that you can, help with this process of helping women to feel more safe to give birth. So.
All right. Well, we could go on and on, but I'm going to take some children to make Pasanki eggs.
Yeah,
today.
There's a fun little workshop that
Yeah.
Stephen's going to do, and then I'm going to clean our Airbnb because we've got guests coming later. So we got a busy life around here. But thank
That's
you
right.
so much for listening today. I
A
mean,
lot of great comments and questions.
thank you, and I hope it was encouraging for you to know that birth is not pathological inherently; that it's a natural, normal function of
Oh,
the body.
and unlike me, my wife will come back and read over the live chat and go into the comments and respond to people
I
and
will.
stuff.
I will.
So if we didn't address what you brought up, she will probably catch up with you in the comments of this
And-
video. So check back later.
We're working on something. We're working on getting me.
Oh, I meant
Yeah.
what are you going to say? I was going to talk about what we're going to do next on this series, on the Mrs. Radlib series.
Just that you're thinking of, we had request, when we did the homeschool talk, we had someone ask, could there be a separate channel where I could just field questions
Yeah.
related to homeschooling, home birth, that kind of thing. So we're working
Yeah,
on that.
I haven't made it just this moment, but please join the Discord, which is in the, well, it's actually not in this description. I usually put it in the description. I should have. Anyway,
Okay.
maybe I'll add it.
Okay.
But please join my Discord, and I'm going to make a channel in the wholesome section called Mrs. Radlib and set Heather up with Discord so she can respond to questions coming out of about homeschooling and birth and stuff
Yeah.
like that, so she can be a resource to the community. I've kind of liked how we're going, though I don't think this is what we're going to do next. Going backwards, right? Like first we talked about homeschooling the kids. Now we're talking about giving birth to the kids. Eventually we want to talk about, courtship and stuff. Sort of backwards through the process of a marital relationship. You
Yeah.
might say.
Yeah.
But I think you already knew what you wanted to do next, right?
I'm not sure.
Oh, okay.
I'm not
I
sure.
thought- okay.
I
We've
need
got
to
a
look
couple
over,
ideas.
I need to look over my notes.
We got a couple
So-
ideas, but our intention from now on, we went ahead and just blocked the calendar. We're going to try to do a Mrs. Radlib stream. It'll be on a Saturday, about once a month. So that's our commitment to you. We're excited to really start making this a regular thing. So much to learn. Thanks, as usual, to Lambda for super encouraging comments, which I'll share with her afterwards,
Okay.
about what we do as a couple on this channel. So, okay, thanks everybody, and see you in a month
Yeah.
with my wife again.
Bye.